The pen hovered over the paper, but her voice stopped him. "Please, don't sign." He turned, stunned. His maid, someone he'd known all his life, stood trembling, holding an old photo that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his best friend. He stared down at the image, his heart pounding. A fire. A slur. A face he recognized smiling in the wreckage. This wasn't just a warning, it was a truth buried for decades, and if he signed that contract, he'd be sealing his silence. This is the story of a black maid's quiet courage, and the billionaire who finally listened. Comment your city if you're watching. Every morning, the mansion came to life like a well-rehearsed performance. Polished marble floors gleamed under soft lights. The aroma of espresso filled the air, and fresh-cut lilies adorned the entryway. It was the kind of luxury that silenced the world outside. Inside, Howard Langston, a self-made billionaire known for his real estate empire and philanthropy, lived in comfort most could only dream of. Yet for all his success, Howard prided himself on treating everyone equally. He wasn't like the others, he said that often. His staff were part of the family, especially Mabel, the 62-year-old black maid who'd worked for the Langstons since Howard was a boy. She knew the corners of that home better than anyone, and had the kind of silent dignity that made her presence feel like the walls themselves, solid, unshakable. To Howard, she was just Miss Mabel, faithful, kind, invisible in the way people like her often were to men like him. She had seen him grow from a shy child to a confident CEO. She had wiped his tears when his mother died and brought him soup when he worked through the night. In many ways, she was more family than the polished partners he now surrounded himself with. That week, Howard was finalizing a partnership deal with his old college roommate, Derek Vaughan, a charismatic investor who had recently returned from Texas with big promises and bigger money. Howard trusted Derek. They shared years of memories, some blurred by whiskey and youth, some sharper with age. The papers were on the desk. The signature line stared back at him, but just before he reached for the pen, Mabel, quiet, careful Mabel, stood in the doorway with trembling hands. "Sir," she said softly, "please, don't sign." Howard blinked. Mabel, her eyes, usually lowered, met his. And in that moment, something cold settled over the room. Something that would soon unravel a truth more disturbing than he could imagine. Howard stared at her, unsure if he'd heard right. Mabel never interrupted business meetings, never raised her voice or spoke out of turn. And yet here she was, shaking, eyes locked on his, voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's not my place, sir," she said, her fingers clutching the edge of her apron, "but you can't trust that man." A silence fell so heavy it seemed to press against the windows. Howard forced a laugh. "Derek? He's been my friend since we were kids." Mabel didn't move. "That's why you won't see it." He waved her off gently, trying to maintain calm. "Mabel, I appreciate your concern, but this is business. I've vetted everything." "No, sir," she said. "You haven't." Then she did something she had never done in 30 years of working there. She stepped forward, crossed into the study, and laid a worn photograph on the table. Howard glanced down. It was grainy, old, but unmistakable. A young Derek. And next, to him, 2 other boys in Confederate flag t-shirts, standing in front of a burned-down shack. Spray-painted on the boards was a word Howard had only ever seen in history books, a slur. Howard's heart pounded. "What is this?" "Miss Lila's house," Mabel said quietly. "She was my cousin. That was her home." Howard's mouth went dry. "No. This can't be. They said it was an accident. Said kids just playing around, but she never came back to the town after that." "And Derek's father?" "He made sure it was swept away like nothing happened." He looked at the image again. The Derek he knew, easygoing, charming, generous, couldn't be the boy in that photo, could he? "I never said anything," Mabel continued. "I couldn't. Not when your daddy worked with his, not when your business needed his money. But I saw him that day, laughing, throwing things." Howard couldn't breathe. A weight settled on his chest. His fingers hovered above the contract. He thought about all the speeches he gave, about equality, about fairness, about how he didn't see color. And yet, had he ever really seen Mabel? The door creaked behind them. Derek stood there grinning. "Everything good?" he asked, eyeing Mabel with a flicker of something cold behind the smile. Howard nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "We were just finishing up." But inside his world was cracking. Howard stared. Down at the contract on his desk, his name printed neatly beside Derek's, a signature line waiting for final ink. But the photo still sat beside it, tainting everything. Derek stepped closer, still smiling. "You ready, partner?" Howard didn't move. His hand hovered over the pen, but it shook. "You remember Miss Lila?" he asked suddenly, eyes never leaving Derek. "For..." A split second, Derek's expression froze. "What?" He laughed too quickly. "Who's that?" Howard slid the photo toward him. "Thought you might." The air in the room thickened. Derek's smile faltered. "Where'd you get that?" Howard stood. "From someone you thought didn't matter." Derek's face hardened. "Howard, that was decades ago. Kids do dumb things. She lost her home. And I was 15. "You burned it down," Howard said flatly. "I didn't light the damn match." Howard's voice shook. "You stood there." Derek leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You really want to throw away millions over something that happened when we were kids?" Behind them, Mabel stood silently. No tears, no emotion, just watching. Howard looked at her, and at that moment he saw her, not as a maid, not as help, but as someone who had endured and stayed silent, even as the world around her pretended nothing happened. He picked up the pen and tore the contract in half. "Get out!" Derek's jaw clenched. He turned, muttering a curse, and slammed the door behind him. Howard sank into his chair, heart racing. He had no idea what would come next, but for the first time, he knew who he was standing with. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. The deal was never signed. In the weeks that followed, Howard's company took a financial hit, but not as big as he feared. Quietly, he cut ties with other partners who had been close with Derek. Some questioned him, some withdrew. But something else happened too, something more profound. He started showing up in rooms he used to walk past. He spoke to Mabel, not just about tasks, but about her story, about her family, about what it meant to stay silent for so long. And he listened. He learned that Miss Lila had never rebuilt her home, that her children had grown up in a rented apartment in a forgotten part of town, that the fire had never been just about flames, it was about fear, about knowing that justice wouldn't come. People like Derek would grow up wealthy and respected, while people like Lila were erased. Howard used to believe racism was a thing of the past, ugly, yes, but buried. That belief was shattered now, and in its place, a question he couldn't shake. How? Many truths had he missed just because he trusted the wrong people and ignored the right ones. He started a fund in Miss Lila's name, quietly, no press, just action, and every time someone praised him, he remembered the photo. Mabel still cleaned the house, but she also sat beside him now as an advisor, not because she needed the title, but because it was long overdue. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and fresh videos.